My daughter-in-law slept with my husband a week before we signed the divorce papers. I pretended to know nothing. At the meeting, the lawyer handed me a document denying my rights. I smiled. What I did next left everyone in shock. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of my dining room as I set out the good china for lunch. Laura had called that morning. Her voice unusually tight when she asked if we could talk. Just the two of us. Something about her tone made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside. Laura was my daughter-in-law, Vanessa's older sister, and while we'd always been cordial, we weren't particularly close. I smoothed my hands over the tablecloth, the same cream-colored linen I'd used for family gatherings for 30 years. At 65, I still took pride in maintaining traditions in creating a welcoming home. The house felt too quiet, with just me rattling around in it lately. Richard, my husband of 43 years, had been distant for months, always finding excuses to work late or disappear into his study. And Michael, our 36-year-old son, was so wrapped up in his marriage to Vanessa that his visits had become perfunctory at best. The doorbell chimed, and I opened it to find Laura standing on my front steps, clutching her purse like a shield. She looked pale, her usually perfect makeup slightly smudged around her eyes as if she'd been crying. "Maggie, thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course, dear. Come in, come in." I led her to the dining room, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she set down her purse. "I made your favorite cucumber sandwiches and that lemon cake you complimented last Easter." She managed a weak smile, but didn't touch the food I'd carefully arranged. Instead, she stared at her folded hands, her knuckles white with tension. "Laura, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." She looked up then, and I saw something in her green eyes that made my blood run cold. Pain, guilt, and underneath it all, a desperate kind of love. "Maggie, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it without destroying everything." My heart began to pound, but I kept my voice steady. "Whatever it is, we can work through it together." Laura let out a shaky breath, tears pooling in her eyes, folded calmly in my lap. "What about them?" "They're having an affair." The words tumbled out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for so long they'd built up pressure. "I've known for weeks. I saw them together at that little cafe downtown, the one near Richard's office. They were holding hands, kissing, acting like lovers. I felt something inside me crack like ice breaking on a frozen pond. But my voice remained steady. "Are you certain?" Laura nodded miserably. "I confronted Vanessa about it. She didn't even try to deny it. She just laughed and said it wasn't any of my business." "But Maggie, the things she said about you." Her voice broke completely. "Then what things?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "She said you were old and boring, that Richard deserved better. She said once the divorce was final, she'd make sure you got as little as possible. She's been planning this, Maggie, the whole thing. She married Michael to get close to the family, to the money. She's been working on Richard for months." The room spun around me, but I gripped the edge of the table and held on. 43 years of marriage, a son I'd raised with love and dedication, a daughter-in-law I'd welcomed with open arms. All of it crumbling because of greed and betrayal. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. Laura reached across the table and grasped my hand. "Because it's wrong. Because you've been nothing but kind to our family, and you don't deserve this. Because Michael doesn't deserve to be married to someone who's capable of this level of deception." She paused, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "And because I love my nephew, and I can't stand watching Vanessa destroy everything good in this family." I stared at our joined hands, mine wrinkled and spotted with age, hers smooth and young. Does Michael know? No, and I don't know if I should tell him. It would destroy him. I pulled my hand free and stood up slowly. Walking to the window that overlooked the garden Richard and I had planted together in our early years. The roses were in full bloom, their red petals bright against the green foliage. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful, but underneath, the roots were rotting. "What will you do?" Laura asked behind me. I turned back to her, and something had shifted inside me. The initial shock was giving way to something cooler, more calculating. I'd spent my entire adult life taking care of others, smoothing over problems, keeping the peace. But this wasn't something that could be smoothed over. "Nothing," I said calmly. Laura's eyes widened. "Nothing. I'm going to pretend I never heard this conversation. I'm going to smile and play the devoted wife and mother, and I'm going to let them think they're winning. But Maggie, Laura, dear, some games require patience, and I've been patient for a very long time." I sat back down and poured myself a cup of tea with steady hands. "Tell me, does Vanessa know you're here?" "No, she thinks I'm at work." "Good. It needs to stay that way." I met her eyes, and she must have seen something there that surprised her, because she sat back slightly. "Can you do that for me? Can you pretend you never told me?" Laura nodded slowly. "But what about Michael? What about your marriage?" I took a sip of tea, letting the familiar ritual calm my racing thoughts. Some battles aren't won by charging in with guns blazing. Dear, sometimes you have to let your enemies think they've already won. After Laura left, I sat alone in my dining room for a long time, staring at the untouched cake and sandwiches. The house felt different now, as if the very walls had shifted. Every family photo on the mantel, every shared memory attached to the furniture and decorations. All of it tainted by the knowledge of what was happening under my own roof. When Richard came home that evening, I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite dinner. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the same meal I'd made every Thursday for 41 years. "Smells good," he said, not meeting my eyes as he loosened his tie. "Long day at the office?" I asked pleasantly, as if I didn't know he'd probably spent his lunch hour with my daughter-in-law. "The usual." He disappeared upstairs to change, and I continued setting the table, my movements automatic and precise. When he returned, we ate in relative silence, the conversation limited to mundane topics about the weather and household repairs. But I watched him carefully now, noting things I'd overlooked before. The way he checked his phone constantly, the new cologne he'd started wearing. The fact that he no longer looked at me when he spoke 43 years, and I was just now seeing my husband clearly. That night, as he lay beside me in our king-sized bed, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. They wanted to play games. Fine, but they had no idea who they were playing against. Living with the knowledge of betrayal was like walking on broken glass. Every smile I forced, every pleasant conversation I maintained, cut deeper into my soul. But I persisted playing my role as the unsuspecting wife and mother, while carefully observing the elaborate deception unfolding in my own home. 3 days after Laura's revelation, Vanessa arrived for our usual Sunday dinner. She swept into my kitchen wearing a new designer dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile bright and false as costume jewelry. "Maggie, you look wonderful," she gushed, embracing me with theatrical warmth. "I love what you've done with the flowers on the table." I returned her hug, noting the expensive perfume that clung to her skin. The same scent I'd detected on Richard's shirts lately. "Thank you, dear. Michael should be here shortly. Would you like some wine while we wait?" That would be lovely. She settled herself at the kitchen island, crossing her legs elegantly. Actually, I was hoping we could have a little chat. Just us girls. My hands remained steady as I poured the wine, though my heart began to race. Of course. What's on your mind? Vanessa took a delicate sip and leaned forward conspiratorially. I'm worried about you, Maggie. About you and Richard. The audacity of it nearly took my breath away. Here she was, the architect of my marriage's destruction, pretending to be concerned. Oh, why would you be worried? Well, you two seem so distant lately. At family gatherings, there's this tension. She placed her manicured hand over mine in a gesture of false sympathy. Marriage can be so challenging after so many years. The spark just fades sometimes. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering her words. You know, you might be right. We have been going through a rough patch. Vanessa's eyes lit up with satisfaction that she tried to disguise as concern. Have you considered counseling? Or maybe it's time to think about what would make you both happier in the long run. You think we should divorce? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. I'm not saying that. She backtracked quickly, but I could see the excitement beneath her concerned facade. I just think life is too short to stay in a marriage that isn't fulfilling. You deserve to be happy, Maggie. You deserve someone who appreciates you. The irony was suffocating. That's very thoughtful of you to say. I care about this family. She continued, her voice taking on a practiced sincerity. Mike would want both his parents to be happy, even if that means apart. And honestly, you're still such an attractive woman. I'm sure there are plenty of men who would be thrilled to have someone like you. I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the naive older woman being gently guided toward divorce by her caring daughter-in-law. Inside, I was cataloging every word, every gesture, every calculated manipulation. When Michael arrived, the dynamic shifted immediately. Vanessa transformed into the devoted wife, hanging on his every word, touching his arm, constantly laughing at his jokes with exaggerated delight. But I noticed how her eyes would drift to the doorway whenever Richard's car pulled into the driveway. Richard entered the dining room 20 minutes late, claiming he'd been detained at the office. Vanessa's cheeks flushed pink when he kissed my cheek in greeting, and I watched as their eyes met for just a moment too long across the table. Sorry I'm late, Richard said, taking his usual seat. Crisis at the Matthews account. No problem at all, Michael replied. We were just talking about the vacation Vanessa and I are planning for next month. Oh, that's right, Richard said, his attention suddenly focused. Where are you thinking of going? We haven't decided yet, Vanessa said, her voice breathier than usual. Maybe somewhere warm, tropical, a place where we can just escape from everything. The way she looked at Richard when she said escape made my stomach turn, but I continued cutting my roast beef with steady hands, maintaining my pleasant expression. That sounds wonderful, I said. You young people work so hard. You deserve a break. After dinner, while Michael and I cleared the dishes, Vanessa and Richard remained at the table, their conversation low and intimate. I strained to catch fragments of their words. Can't keep doing this, Vanessa's voice urgent and pleading. Not much longer, Richard's reply reassuring. She suspects something, Vanessa again worried. She doesn't know anything, Richard dismissive. They were wrong. I knew everything. But I continued loading the dishwasher, humming softly to myself, as if I didn't have a care in the world. The following week, I made an appointment with my lawyer. Not the family attorney Richard and I had used for years, but a sharp woman named Catherine Lee, who specialized in complex divorce cases. Her office was downtown, far from our usual haunts, ensuring I wouldn't be seen by anyone who might report back to Richard. Catherine was younger than me, probably in her 40s, with intelligent dark eyes and an air of competence that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, after I'd explained my situation, "I have to ask why you haven't confronted your husband directly about the affair." I clasped my hands in my lap, choosing my words carefully. "Because I want to understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I make any decisions. This house, our assets, our family legacy. I need to know where I stand legally." Catherine nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. Let's start with the basics. How are your assets currently titled?" For the next hour, we went through everything. The house purchased 41 years ago with money from my family's estate, the investment accounts accumulated over decades of careful saving, the family business that Richard had inherited from his father, most importantly, the trust that had been established by my grandfather, which included the house and several other properties. "This is interesting," Catherine said, studying the trust documents I'd brought. "Your grandfather was quite forward-thinking. This trust has some very specific provisions about inheritance and divorce." "What kind of provisions?" "Well, the house can never be sold or transferred to anyone outside your direct bloodline. Even if you divorce, your husband would have no claim to it. And there's a clause here about infidelity that's quite unusual for trusts established in that era." My pulse quickened. "What does it say?" Catherine read from the document. "In the event that a marriage is dissolved due to adultery, the innocent party retains all rights to trust properties, and the offending party forfeits any claim to assets derived from or connected to said trust." I sat back in my chair, feeling something like hope stir in my chest for the first time in weeks. So, if I can prove Richard's affair, I would retain not just the house, but several other properties and investments that are connected to the trust. "Properties that your husband currently believes he has a stake in, and he doesn't know about these provisions." Catherine shook her head. "From what you've told me, it sounds like he's operating under the assumption that you'd be entitled to half of everything in a standard divorce proceeding. He has no idea about the trust's protections." I left Catherine's office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Richard and Vanessa thought they were playing chess, but they didn't even know all the pieces on the board. That evening, I watched as Richard struggled to maintain his facade of the devoted husband. He complimented my cooking with forced enthusiasm, asked about my day with manufactured interest, and kissed my forehead goodnight with lips that had been kissing another woman. But I could see the cracks in his performance. The guilt was eating at him even as his arrogance convinced him he was getting away with it. "Richard," I said as we prepared for bed, "I've been thinking about what Vanessa said the other day about our marriage." He stiffened his back to me as he hung up his shirt. "What about it?" "Maybe she's right. Maybe we should consider our options." He turned then, and I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Relief. Excitement. "Are you saying you want a divorce?" I shrugged, as if the thought didn't break my heart. "I'm saying maybe it's time we both pursued our happiness, wherever that might lead." Richard nodded slowly, trying to look solemn while clearly fighting back a smile. "If that's what you want, Maggie, I just want you to be happy." But I smiled back at him, playing my part in this terrible theater. "I want us both to be happy." As I lay in bed that night, listening to Richard's satisfied breathing beside me, I thought about Vanessa's triumphant smile, about the expensive dress and perfume she wore to family dinners. Now about the way she touched my son's shoulder while planning her escape with his father. They thought they were so clever. They thought they'd already won. They had no idea the game was just beginning. The law offices of Caldwell and Associates occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown Chicago high-rise, all marble and mahogany, designed to intimidate. I sat in the reception area, my hands folded calmly in my lap, while Richard paced near the floor-to-ceiling windows, checking his phone every few seconds. He'd been on edge all morning, snapping at me over breakfast and muttering under his breath about getting this over with. Vanessa had insisted on coming, claiming she wanted to support Michael during this difficult time for the family. She sat beside my son now, her hand resting possessively on his thigh while she whispered reassurances in his ear. Michael looked devastated, his face pale and drawn. He still believed this divorce was a mutual decision, a sad but amicable end to a marriage that had simply run its course. If only he knew the truth. "Mrs. Thompson? Mr. Thompson." A tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit approached us. "I'm Stephen Caldwell. Thank you for coming in today." Richard had chosen Caldwell himself, claiming the man was the best divorce attorney in the city. What Richard didn't mention was that Caldwell was also a longtime friend of his from their country club, a detail I discovered during my own research into the man's background. We were led into a conference room dominated by a massive table surrounded by leather chairs. Caldwell took his seat at the head, spreading documents across the polished surface with practiced efficiency. Richard sat to his right while I took the chair directly across from them. Michael and Vanessa positioned themselves at the far end of the table, close enough to observe but removed from the main proceedings. Before we begin, Caldwell said, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone accustomed to controlling rooms full of people. "I want to ensure everyone understands that this is intended to be an amicable dissolution. Both parties have expressed a desire to handle this matter with dignity and fairness." I nodded graciously. Of course, that's what we both want. Richard shot me a quick glance, probably surprised by my cooperative tone. He'd been expecting resistance, arguments, tears. Instead, I'd been nothing but reasonable since agreeing to the divorce, which had clearly unsettled him. "Excellent," Caldwell continued. "Now let's review the proposed settlement." He slid a thick folder across the table to me. "As you'll see, we've attempted to divide the marital assets equitably, taking into consideration the length of the marriage and both parties' contributions." I opened the folder and began reading, my expression neutral, even as the words on the page made my blood boil. According to Caldwell's proposal, I would receive the small downtown condo we'd purchased as an investment property 16 years ago, along with half of our joint savings account and a modest monthly alimony payment. Richard would retain the family home, the business, the vacation properties, and the majority of our investment portfolio. "This seems rather one-sided," I said mildly, not looking up from the documents. Caldwell cleared his throat. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Thompson, but we have to consider the reality of the situation. Your husband has been the primary breadwinner throughout the marriage, and the business requires continuity of leadership. The house has significant maintenance costs that would be difficult for you to manage on a reduced income." They thought I was too old, too dependent, too naive to fight for what was rightfully mine. Additionally, Caldwell continued, his tone becoming more condescending. "There are some complications regarding the house specifically. It appears there may be some irregularities with the original deed and trust documentation. Until those issues are resolved, it would be prudent to leave the property in Mr. Thompson's name to avoid any legal complications." I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of it. They were trying to steal my family's house using fabricated legal complications. I could see Vanessa sitting straighter in her chair, probably calculating how soon she could redecorate the master bedroom. "I see," I said quietly. "And these irregularities, when do you expect them to be resolved?" Caldwell waved his hand dismissively. "These things can take years to sort out. Generational property transfers, trust modifications. It's quite complex. Really, it's better for everyone if we keep things simple." Richard leaned forward, his voice taking on the patient tone he'd used to explain complex business deals to me over the years. "Maggie, I know this isn't easy, but Caldwell knows what he's talking about. This way you won't have to worry about property taxes, maintenance, all those headaches. The condo will be perfect for you, much more manageable." Manageable. As if I were a child who needed to be protected from adult responsibilities, I looked around the table, taking in each face. Caldwell smug and satisfied with his clever manipulation of legal language. Richard trying to look sympathetic while barely containing his excitement at getting everything he wanted. Vanessa, her eyes bright with triumph as she imagined herself as mistress of my family home. And Michael, my sweet boy, looking uncomfortable but trusting that his parents were handling things fairly. "Well," I said, closing the folder with a soft snap. "I suppose you've thought of everything." Caldwell smiled, probably thinking he'd won. "We've tried to be thorough. Yes. Of course, you're welcome to have your own attorney review the documents, but I think you'll find everything is quite standard for a case like this. A case like this. A devoted wife of 43 years being discarded so her husband could play house with their son's wife." "That won't be necessary," I said, reaching for the pen Caldwell offered. "Where do I sign?" The room went silent. Even Vanessa looked surprised by my immediate capitulation. "Are you sure, Mom?" Michael asked, his voice uncertain. "Maybe you should take some time to think about it." I turned to my son, this good man, who still believed in fairness and honesty because I'd raised him too, and smiled. "Sweetheart, sometimes in life you have to know when to fight and when to accept reality. Your father and I have had a good run, but it's time for both of us to start new chapters." Richard was frowning now, clearly puzzled by my easy surrender. He'd expected a battle, had probably prepared arguments and justifications for why he deserved everything. My compliance was making him nervous. "The signature goes here," Caldwell said, pointing to a line at the bottom of the final page. "And here, and initial here." I signed my name with steady strokes, each letter precisely formed. Margaret Maggie Thompson, the same signature I'd used on our marriage certificate 43 years ago, back when I'd believed in forever. "There," I said, setting down the pen and looking directly at Richard. "I hope this gives you everything you're looking for." Something flickered in his eyes. Then guilt, maybe, or a belated recognition of what he was destroying. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by the selfish satisfaction of a man who thought he'd gotten away with betraying his wife. Vanessa could barely contain herself. She reached over and squeezed Michael's hand, her voice breathy with excitement. "I'm so proud of how maturely you're both handling this. It takes real strength to put family first." "Family first." The woman who was sleeping with her father-in-law was lecturing me about putting family first. "Thank you, dear," I said warmly. "That means so much coming from you." As we prepared to leave, Caldwell gathered the signed documents with obvious satisfaction. "I'll file these with the court tomorrow. The divorce should be finalized within 61 days. 61 days until Richard was free to marry his son's wife. 61 days until Vanessa thought she'd be living in my family home. 61 days until they discovered that some games have rules the players don't even know exist." Outside the building, Michael hugged me tightly, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "Mom, are you okay? You seem so calm about all this." I patted his cheek. This boy who looked so much like his father had at that age, back when Richard still had a soul. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Everything is going to work out exactly as it should." Vanessa appeared beside us, her arms sliding around Michael's waist with practiced possessiveness. "Your mother is incredibly strong, baby. She's going to be so much happier now." "I'm sure I will be," I agreed, meeting her triumphant gaze with a serene smile. "I'm sure we all will be." As they walked away, I could hear Vanessa's excited chatter about helping me pack, about finding me a nice retirement community where I could make friends my own age, about how much simpler life would be for everyone now. I stood there, in the shadow of the high-rise, watching my husband and daughter-in-law celebrate their victory, and felt a deep, cold satisfaction settle in my chest. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd outsmarted the naive old woman who'd spent 43 years taking care of everyone else. They had no idea that in exactly 61 days, when their divorce became final and they tried to claim their prizes, they would discover that some property belongs not to husbands or wives, but to bloodlines that stretch back generations. I walked to my car with steady steps, already thinking about the phone call I needed to make to Catherine Lee. There were preparations to complete documentation to gather, and a few more moves to make in this chess game they didn't even know they were losing. The real show was about to begin. 2 weeks after signing the divorce papers, I was tending to my rose garden when I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. Michael's car pulled into the driveway. But something was wrong. Instead of his usual cheerful wave, he sat behind the wheel for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. When he finally emerged, I could see that my son was broken. His usually pristine appearance was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his hair uncombed. But it was his eyes that broke my heart. They held the hollow, devastated look of someone whose world had just collapsed. "Michael?" I set down my gardening shears and hurried toward him. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? He looked at me for a moment, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't find the words. Then his face crumpled, and he collapsed onto my front steps like a marionette whose strings had been cut. "She's been lying to me," he whispered, his voice raw with pain. "All this time, she's been lying." And I sat down beside him, not trusting myself to speak. Part of me wanted to wrap my arms around him and tell him everything would be okay. Another part wanted to demand details to finally have confirmation of what I'd known for weeks. Instead, I waited, letting him find his way to the truth at his own pace. I found text messages he continued staring at his hands, hundreds of them between Vanessa and Richard. They've been planning this whole thing for months." My heart ached for him, but I forced my voice to remain calm. "Planning what exactly?" Michael let out a bitter laugh that sounded nothing like my gentle son. "The divorce, the affair. They thought they were so clever, waiting until after you signed the papers to run off together. Vanessa was bragging to someone about how easy it was to manipulate both of you." The words hit me like physical blows, even though I'd known the truth for weeks. Hearing it from Michael's lips made it real in a way that all my observations and suspicions hadn't. "How did you find out?" I asked quietly. "Laura called me." Michael's voice was thick with gratitude and grief. "She said she couldn't watch this happen anymore. She told me where to look, what to search for. I thought she was crazy at first, but then I checked Vanessa's phone while she was in the shower, and he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I could imagine what those messages contained: the excitement, the planning, the cruel laughter at the expense of the people they were betraying. "Laura has been trying to warn people for weeks," Michael continued. "She said she tried to talk to Vanessa, begged her to stop, but Vanessa just laughed, said she'd worked too hard to get close to our family's money to give up now." Money. Of course, it all came back to money. Not love, not genuine connection, just cold calculation about assets and inheritance. "Where is Vanessa now?" I asked. I confronted her this morning, showed her the messages I'd found. Michael wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. She didn't even try to deny it. She just shrugged and said I was naive if I thought she'd ever actually loved me. Said Dad could give her things I never could. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. To dismiss years of marriage to mock the love of a good man who'd done nothing but cherish her, it was beyond comprehension. "I threw her out," Michael said, his voice gaining strength. "I told her she had an hour to pack her things and get out of our house." She laughed at me. "Mom," he added, "it didn't matter, because soon she'd be living somewhere much nicer anyway. Somewhere much nicer. My family home, which she believed would soon be hers." "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I said, finally allowing myself to touch his shoulder. You didn't deserve any of this. Michael looked up at me, then his eyes bright with unshed tears. How are you so calm about this? Dad betrayed you too. He threw away 43 years of marriage for her. I studied my son's face, this man I'd raised to believe in goodness and loyalty, and made a decision. He deserved to know that he wasn't alone in this, that someone else was fighting for what was right. Michael, there's something I need to tell you about the divorce, about what really happened in that lawyer's office. Over the next hour, I told him everything about Laura's warning about my weeks of careful observation about Catherine Lee and the trust provisions that Richard and Vanessa knew nothing about. Michael listened in stunned silence as I explained how I deliberately played the role of the naive, defeated wife while gathering evidence and preparing my real response. You knew, he whispered when I finished. All this time, you knew what they were doing. I knew, I confirmed, and I let them think they'd won, because sometimes the best strategy is to let your opponents reveal exactly who they are before you make your move. Michael stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Mom, I had no idea you were so strategic. I smiled sadly. 43 years of marriage teaches you a lot about people, sweetheart, including when to fight and when to wait for the right moment. So what happens now when Dad finds out about the trust? That's up to him and Vanessa. I stood up, brushing dirt from my gardening clothes. They made their choices. Now they get to live with the consequences. Michael stood too, looking more like himself than he had since arriving. What about us? I mean, I know Vanessa is my wife, or was my wife, but I can't just pretend this didn't happen. You don't have to pretend anything, I assured him. You're the innocent party in all this. You have every right to protect yourself. As if summoned by our conversation, another car pulled into the driveway. This time it was Laura, her face anxious as she hurried toward us. Michael, I'm so sorry, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I know this is all my fault. If I hadn't told you to look. You saved me, Michael interrupted, his voice firm. If you hadn't warned me, I would have spent months or years married to someone who was using me. You saved me from wasting my life on a lie. Laura's eyes filled with tears. I should have said something sooner. I should have protected you better. I watched the two of them, noting the way Laura's genuine distress contrasted so sharply with Vanessa's calculated manipulation. Where Vanessa was all sharp edges and hidden agendas, Laura radiated warmth and sincerity. Even in her guilt and pain, she was thinking of Michael's welfare. Laura, I said gently, you did exactly the right thing. You chose loyalty and honesty over family convenience. That takes real courage. She looked at me with surprised gratitude. I was so afraid you'd hate me for bringing this into your family. My dear, you didn't bring anything into our family. You revealed what was already here, festering in the darkness. Now we can deal with it in the light. Michael moved closer to Laura, his hand hovering near her shoulder, as if he wanted to comfort her, but wasn't sure if it was appropriate. Laura, I need you to know how grateful I am, not just for warning me, but for being honest, when it would have been easier to stay silent. The look that passed between them was charged with something new and tentative. Not romance, not yet, but the recognition of shared values, of similar wounds, of the possibility that something good might grow from the ashes of this betrayal. I should go, Laura said suddenly, as if realizing she was intruding on a family crisis. You two need time to process all this. Actually, Michael said quickly. Would you like to stay for dinner? Mom makes the best pot roast in the county, and I think we could all use some normal conversation right now. Laura looked to me for permission, and I nodded warmly. I'd love to have you stay. It's been far too long since we've had honest conversation around our dinner table. As the three of us walked toward the house, I felt something shift in the air around us. The toxic cloud that had been hovering over our family was finally beginning to lift. Vanessa's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed the true character of everyone involved. Michael was stronger than I'd given him credit for, capable of facing hard truths and making difficult decisions. Laura was proving herself to be everything her sister wasn't. Loyal, honest, selfless. And I had rediscovered my own strength, my ability to plan and wait and fight for what mattered. That evening, as we sat around my kitchen table sharing stories and laughter, I watched Michael and Laura together. There was something healing in their connection, a recognition that they had both been betrayed by someone they loved. But that betrayal didn't have to define them. "You know," Laura said quietly as we cleared the dishes, "Vanessa always said I was too soft, too trusting. She said nice people finish last." Michael paused in his work, looking at her intently. "I used to think being decent was enough, that if you treated people well and trusted them, they'd do the same for you. And now," I asked, curious about how this experience would change my son. Michael glanced at Laura, then back at me. "Now I think being decent is still the right choice, but it doesn't mean you have to be naive. You can be kind and still protect yourself. You can trust people who prove they deserve it." As the evening wound down and Laura prepared to leave, Michael walked her to her car. Through the kitchen window, I watched them stand talking quietly in the driveway, their conversation intimate and earnest. When he finally returned to the house, there was something different about his expression. "She's remarkable," he said simply. "Yes, she is," I agreed, very different from her sister. Michael nodded thoughtfully. "I keep thinking about what you said earlier about letting people reveal who they really are. Vanessa showed me exactly who she was, but I was too blind to see it. But Laura, she's been showing me who she is too, and I almost missed it because I was so focused on the wrong person." The heart heals, Michael, and when it does, it often sees more clearly than before. That night, as I prepared for bed in the house that would soon legally be mine again, I thought about the strange turns life takes. Vanessa's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also created opportunities for truth, for genuine connection, for new beginnings based on honesty rather than deception. In trying to destroy our family, Vanessa had actually revealed its strength. She'd stripped away the pretenses and false loyalties, leaving only what was real and worth preserving. Tomorrow, I would call Catherine Lee and begin the final phase of my plan. But tonight, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The call came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 63 days after I'd signed those divorce papers in Caldwell's office. I was having coffee on my back porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, when my phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in months, I felt genuine amusement as I answered. "Hello, Richard. What the hell have you done?" His voice was raw with panic and rage, all pretense of civility abandoned. I took a leisurely sip of my coffee before responding. "Good morning to you, too. I'm fine. Thank you for asking. The weather is lovely today." "Don't play games with me, Maggie. My lawyer called an hour ago. He says there's a problem with the house, something about a trust that no one mentioned before." "Oh, that." I kept my voice light, conversational. "Yes, I imagine that came as quite a surprise." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Then his voice came back lower and more dangerous than before. "You knew. You knew about this trust the whole time, didn't you?" "Of course I knew. It's my family's trust, Richard. My grandfather established it to protect our property from exactly this kind of situation." "This kind of situation?" His voice cracked with indignation. "We're getting divorced. That's normal, Maggie. People get divorced every day. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out over the garden that my grandmother had planted, that my mother had tended, that I had lovingly maintained for 41 years. You're right. People do get divorced every day, but they usually don't commit adultery with their daughter-in-law while planning to steal their wife's family home. The sharp intake of breath told me he hadn't expected such direct confrontation. For weeks I'd played the role of the confused, hurt wife. Now he was hearing from the woman who'd been planning his downfall while he celebrated his cleverness. "How long have you known?" he asked finally. "Long enough," I replied. "Long enough to document everything. Long enough to protect what matters. Long enough to watch you and Vanessa plan your little future together in my family's house." "Our house," he corrected automatically, but there was no conviction in his voice anymore. "No, Richard, never our house. The deed has always been in trust. You are allowed to live here as my husband, but you never owned so much as a single brick. And now that you've chosen to end our marriage through adultery, you forfeited any right to remain here." Another long silence. Then, in a voice that sounded like a man watching his world collapse, "Where am I supposed to go?" The pathetic quality of the question almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. "I imagine you and Vanessa will figure something out. You're both so clever after all." "Maggie, please. Can't we work something out? I know I made mistakes." I cut him off, my voice sharp for the first time. "Mistakes are forgetting to pick up milk or missing an anniversary. What you did was a deliberate betrayal of everything we built together. What you did was seduce our son's wife and plan to steal my inheritance. Those aren't mistakes, Richard. That's who you chose to become." I heard a woman's voice in the background, shrill and demanding, Vanessa no doubt wanting to know what was happening to her carefully laid plans. "I have to go," Richard said, his voice defeated. "But this isn't over." "Yes, it is," I replied calmly. "It's been over for quite some time. You just didn't realize it yet." After hanging up, I sat back down and finished my coffee in peaceful silence. The phone rang several more times. Richard's number, then an unknown number that was probably Vanessa, but I didn't answer. I had nothing more to say to either of them. An hour later, Michael's car pulled into the driveway. Michael looked grim, but determined, as he walked up the porch steps, Laura beside him holding a manila folder. "Mom, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "Of course, come sit down." Michael took the chair across from me while Laura settled beside him, their proximity speaking to the growing bond between them. Over the past few weeks, they'd become inseparable, finding solace and understanding in their shared experience of betrayal. "Laura has been helping me go through Vanessa's things," Michael began. "We found some documents that I think you need to see." Laura opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. These were hidden in a lockbox in Vanessa's closet. "I think they show just how long this has been planned." The first document was a copy of my grandfather's will, annotated in Vanessa's handwriting, with notes about property values and inheritance laws. The second was a timeline meticulously detailed, showing when she'd planned to seduce Richard, when they'd initiate divorce proceedings, and when they expected to take possession of the house. But it was the third document that made my blood run cold. It was a life insurance policy on me taken out by Vanessa 7 months ago, enlisting herself as the beneficiary. "She forged your signature," Laura said quietly. "I checked with the insurance company. They have no record of you ever agreeing to this policy." Michael's face was pale with fury. "She wasn't just planning to steal from you, Mom. She was planning to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. I stared at the policy, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The woman I'd welcomed into my family, whom I'd treated like a daughter, had been planning not just my financial ruin, but potentially something far worse. "There's more," Laura continued, pulling out a printed email. "This is from a private investigator Vanessa hired to look into your family's assets. She's been researching the trust for months, trying to find loopholes. The investigator's report was thorough and chilling. It detailed not just the trust provisions, but my daily routines, my medical history, my relationships with neighbors and friends. Vanessa had been studying me like a predator studies prey. "Michael, I need you to take these documents to the police," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. "The forged insurance policy alone is a felony." "Already done," he replied. "I called Detective James Carter this morning. He's opening an investigation into identity theft and insurance fraud." We sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the full scope of Vanessa's betrayal. She hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been systematically planning to destroy our entire family. "There's something else," Laura said hesitantly. "Something I probably should have told you weeks ago." Michael took her hand encouragingly. "Go ahead." "Vanessa isn't just manipulative and greedy. She's dangerous." "This isn't the first time she's done something like this." Laura's voice was barely above a whisper. "Our Aunt Eleanor died 3 years ago. Sudden heart attack, very unexpected. Vanessa was taking care of her at the time, helping with her medications." The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Michael's grip on Laura's hand tightened. "The doctor said it could happen to anyone," Laura continued. "Eleanor had a heart condition, and sometimes these things just happen, but afterward, Vanessa inherited Eleanor's house and her savings, and she seemed so pleased about it. Not grief-stricken like you'd expect, but satisfied." "Did you tell the police about this?" I asked. Laura nodded. "Detective Carter is looking into Eleanor's death too. He said they might be able to exhume the body if they find enough evidence to warrant an investigation." We were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up the driveway with unnecessary aggression. Through the trees, I could see Richard's Mercedes followed by a small moving truck. Vanessa emerged from the passenger seat like a fury, her perfect facade finally cracking to reveal the calculating predator beneath. "That's my cue to go inside," I said, standing. "Michael, would you and Laura mind handling this? I don't think I can look at either of them right now without saying something I might regret." From my living room window, I watched the confrontation unfold on my front lawn. Vanessa was screaming at Michael, her face twisted with rage as she pointed at the house. Richard stood beside the moving truck, his shoulders slumped in defeat. 2 burly movers waited uncertainly, unsure whether to unload their cargo. Michael's voice carried through the glass, calm but implacable. "You're not welcome here, Vanessa. Neither of you are." "This is my house!" Vanessa shrieked. "We signed papers. It's ours." "No," Laura said, stepping forward to stand beside Michael. "It never was, and it never will be." The look Vanessa gave her sister was pure venom. "You did this. You poisoned them against me. You're just jealous because I found a way out of our pathetic family, and you're still stuck being nobody." "I'd rather be nobody than be you," Laura replied quietly. Vanessa lunged forward as if to attack her sister, but Michael stepped between them, his presence enough to stop her advance. For a moment, the 3 of them formed a tableau. Michael and Laura united in their strength and integrity. Vanessa isolated in her rage and desperation. "Get off my property," Michael said, his voice carrying an authority I'd never heard from him before. "Both of you. You have 5 minutes to get in that truck and leave, or I'm calling the police." Richard finally spoke, his voice tired and broken. "Come on, Vanessa. It's over." But Vanessa wasn't ready to accept defeat. She spun toward the house, her eyes wild as she spotted me in the window. "This isn't over," she screamed. "You think you're so smart, but I know things about this family. I know secrets that could destroy all of you." I opened the window slightly, my voice carrying clearly across the yard. The only secrets being destroyed today are yours, dear. Detective Carter is very interested in your relationship with your Aunt Eleanor. The color drained from Vanessa's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Richard grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the truck with sudden urgency. "We're leaving," he called out. "We're leaving right now." As the moving truck pulled away, followed by Richard's Mercedes, I felt something release in my chest. The strangers who had invaded my home, who had planned to steal my legacy, and possibly worse, were finally gone. Michael and Laura came inside, both looking emotionally drained, but victorious. "It's over," Michael said, collapsing into my favorite armchair. "They're really gone." "The house part is over," I corrected gently. "But Vanessa still needs to face consequences for what she's done. The forgery, the fraud, possibly Eleanor's death. Justice moves slowly, but it moves." Laura curled up on the couch, looking younger and more vulnerable than her 31 years. "I keep thinking I should feel sorry for her. She's my sister after all, but I can't. She chose this path step by step, decision by decision." "You don't owe her your sympathy," I assured her. "She made her choices. Now she gets to live with them." As evening fell, the three of us prepared dinner together in my kitchen. It felt like a celebration, though none of us said so explicitly. We were celebrating survival integrity and the bonds that truly matter. Looking at Michael and Laura working side by side, I could see something beautiful growing between them. Not the desperate, grasping love that Vanessa had offered, but something real and lasting, built on mutual respect and shared values. "You know," I said as we sat down to eat, "this house has seen a lot of history. My grandmother raised 5 children here. My mother survived the Depression within these walls. I raised Michael here, and someday I hope his children will play in that same backyard." Michael and Laura exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their future together. "But tonight," I continued, raising my glass of wine, "we celebrate the fact that this house will remain in the hands of people who understand what family really means." As we toasted to new beginnings, I felt the deep satisfaction of a battle well fought and won. Vanessa and Richard had tried to destroy everything I held dear, but in the end, they'd only succeeded in revealing what was truly precious. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen preparing Thanksgiving dinner. The same kitchen where I'd entertained Vanessa's false sympathy and endured her calculated manipulations. But today, the space felt entirely different. Warm, honest, filled with genuine laughter and love. Michael was at the stove carefully basting the turkey with the same concentration he'd shown as a child learning to tie his shoes. Laura sat at the kitchen island, her engagement ring catching the afternoon light as she chopped vegetables for stuffing. They'd announced their engagement a month ago, and seeing them together still filled me with quiet joy. "Mom, the timer for the sweet potatoes is going off," Michael called out, his sleeves rolled up and an apron protecting his shirt. "I've got it," Laura said, sliding off her stool with practiced ease. Over the past months, she'd become an integral part of our household rhythm, helping with cooking, gardening, and the 1,000 small tasks that make a house a home. The front doorbell chimed, and I went to answer it, expecting our neighbors, the Andersons, whom I'd invited to join us for dinner. Instead, I found Detective Carter standing on my porch, his expression serious, but not grim. "Mrs. Thompson, I hope I'm not interrupting your holiday." "Not at all, Detective. Please come in. Can I offer you some coffee?" "We have plenty of food if you'd like to stay for dinner." He followed me into the living room, declining my offer of refreshment. "I wanted to update you on the investigation before the holiday weekend." Michael and Laura appeared in the doorway, their faces tense with anticipation. "Vanessa Parker has been formally charged with insurance fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud," Carter began. "The district attorney feels confident about securing convictions on all counts." "And Eleanor?" Laura asked quietly. Carter's expression grew more serious. The exhumation revealed traces of digitalis in your aunt's system. Levels that would be consistent with intentional poisoning, not accidental overdose from her heart medication. Laura's hand flew to her mouth. She really killed her. We're building a case for first-degree murder. Vanessa's fingerprints were found on the medicine bottles, and we discovered she'd been researching the effects of digitalis online for weeks before Eleanor's death. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. What about Richard? No evidence of his involvement in Eleanor's death, but he's been charged as an accessory to the fraud schemes. His cooperation with the investigation will likely result in a reduced sentence. After Carter left, we sat in the living room absorbing the news. Justice was finally being served, but it felt hollow somehow. Eleanor was still dead. Michael's marriage was still destroyed. And 43 years of my life had still been built on a foundation that crumbled the moment my husband chose betrayal over loyalty. "Are you okay, Mom?" Michael asked, noting my silence. I considered the question carefully. "I'm relieved," I said finally. "Relieved that Vanessa can't hurt anyone else. Relieved that Eleanor will get justice. But mostly, I'm relieved that we survived this with our integrity intact." Laura reached over and squeezed my hand. "I keep thinking about all the what-ifs. What if I hadn't told you about the affair? What if you hadn't known about the trust? What if Vanessa had succeeded?" "But she didn't," Michael pointed out. "And we're all stronger now because of it." He was right. The past 7 months had tested us in ways I'd never imagined, but we'd emerged more connected, more honest with each other, more aware of what truly mattered. The Andersons arrived shortly after, followed by Catherine Lee and her husband, whom I'd invited after discovering we shared a love of gardening. The dining room filled with conversation and laughter, the kind of genuine warmth that can't be manufactured or manipulated. As we sat down to dinner, I looked around the table at the faces gathered there. Real friends, chosen family people who cared about each other without agenda or calculation. This was what Vanessa had never understood. That true wealth isn't measured in property values or bank accounts, but in the quality of the relationships you build. "Before we eat," I said, standing and raising my wine glass, "I want to say something." The conversation quieted, all eyes turning to me. This year has been one of the most difficult of my life. I lost a marriage I thought would last forever. I discovered that someone I loved was capable of unimaginable betrayal. I learned that my family was under attack from within. I paused, meeting each pair of eyes around the table. But I also learned that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. I learned that my son is a man of integrity who chooses love over revenge. I learned that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as losses. I looked directly at Laura, this woman who'd had the courage to speak truth when silence would have been easier. I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about people who stand by you when the world tries to tear you down. People who choose honesty over convenience, loyalty over self-interest. Michael stood and raised his own glass. To Mom, who taught us that grace under pressure isn't just a saying, it's a way of life. To Maggie, Catherine added, who proved that patience and planning can overcome any adversary. To new beginnings, Laura said softly. And to families we choose as much as families we're born into. As we clinked glasses, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not because the story was over. Michael and Laura would marry in the spring. There would be grandchildren eventually. Life would continue with all its joys and challenges. But because I finally understood who I was beyond being Richard's wife or Michael's mother. I was Margaret Thompson, keeper of my family's legacy, protector of what mattered, survivor of betrayal, and architect of my own future. After dinner, as our guests prepared to leave, Catherine pulled me aside. "Have you given any thought to what you'll do with the downtown condo?" she asked. "The one from the divorce settlement?" I smiled. "I'm thinking of turning it into a refuge for women who are rebuilding their lives after divorce. Nothing grand or institutional, just a quiet place where someone can stay while they figure out their next chapter." Catherine nodded approvingly. "Vanessa probably thought she was taking something valuable from you with that settlement. She had no idea she was giving you away to help other women in similar situations. Ironic, isn't it? Her greed became the foundation for something genuinely useful." And later that evening, after Michael and Laura had gone home to their apartment, I walked through the quiet house, turning off lights and checking locks. The same ritual I'd performed for 41 years. But now it felt different. Peaceful, rather than routine, secure, rather than automatic. In my bedroom, I opened the jewelry box where I kept my most precious possessions. Past the pearl necklace my mother had given me, past the gold bracelet from my grandmother. I found what I was looking for. My original wedding ring, the simple gold band Richard had placed on my finger when we were both young and full of dreams. I held it up to the lamplight, studying the inscription inside. Forever and always. Forever had lasted 43 years. Always had ended the day he chose another woman over his family. But that didn't erase the good years, the love that had been real even if it hadn't been permanent. I placed the ring back in the box, not with anger or sadness, but with acceptance. That chapter of my life was closed, but the story continued. My phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. "Thank you for an amazing Thanksgiving, Mom. Laura and I are so grateful to have you in our lives." I typed back, "Thank you for becoming the man I always knew you could be. Sleep well." A second message appeared, this one from Laura. "I never had a mother who believed in me the way you do. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like." I wiped away the tears that sprang to my eyes. At 65, I was discovering that some of life's greatest gifts come in the second act, when you finally understand what you're worth and refuse to accept anything less. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, the sounds of a structure that had weathered many storms and would weather many more. I thought about my grandmother who'd raised 5 children in this house during the Depression. I thought about my mother who'd maintained it as a sanctuary during World War II when my father was overseas. I was part of a long line of strong women who'd protected what mattered, who'd faced adversity with grace and determination. Vanessa had tried to break that chain, but she had only succeeded in forging it stronger. Tomorrow, I would start planning the refuge for divorced women using the condo that was supposed to be my consolation prize. Next month, I would help Michael and Laura plan their wedding, which would take place in the garden where my grandmother had married my grandfather 81 years ago. But tonight, I would simply be grateful for survival, for discovery, for the knowledge that at any age, at any stage of life, it's never too late to discover who you really are when everything false is stripped away. Outside my window, the November wind rustled through the bare branches of the oak tree Richard and I had planted on our 11th anniversary. It had weathered storms, droughts, and countless seasons of change. Like me, it had bent, but not broken, had endured and grown stronger. In the spring, it would bloom again, and so would I. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.